All right, I guess we'll get started and I will let folks in if they come into the waiting room. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Elizabeth Clucci. I'm the Assistant Dean for Graduate Professional Development, and I previously worked with the NSF GRFP. I'm very happy to see that you are all here today for the NSF GRFP workshop series. With us today is H. Fogarty. H is responsible for working with graduate students and undergraduate students on the NSF GRFP in their role in the Office of Fellowships and Scholarships. Also presenting today is the NSF GRFP Faculty Fellow, Dr. Ashlee Ford Versypt. Did I say it right? Thank you for putting that on your slide. I appreciate that, Ashlee. I always hope that I'm saying your name correctly. So over the course of the next several days, you will be hearing from Dr. Ford Versypt. You will hear from Dr. Rhonda Reed from the Writing Center about personal statement components. You will also hear from Lauren Kurzalik from Engineering Education about technical writing. And finally, you'll hear from Dr. Kristen A. Scher about broader impact. And you will also hear from current fellows. H is going to record the sessions and put them in a UB box. All of the presentations will also be uploaded into the UB box so that you can refer to them, rewatch the video, and review the materials in the box. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ashlee Ford Versypt.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. I am so excited to have you all here with us virtually today. It's really exciting to kick off this season of thinking about graduate fellowships and how you might get your science paid for as a graduate student. Now, first and foremost, as you're getting a PhD in science and engineering, you would already be getting some funding from your department, probably an ample stipend. This would be to supplant that and add to it and be an honor. So we'll get into more of those details, but just wanted to make sure that that's known up in the front. One of the other things, as I preface this presentation today, is there's a lot of terminology and acronyms that we will use frequently. So I tried to define them the first time, but even one of the things Elizabeth just mentioned, the broader impacts, that it has a very specific interpretation at the National Science Foundation. And so hopefully by the end of this workshop series, you will be familiar with this terminology, you will be familiar with the acronyms, and then be knowledgeable as you prepare your application materials if you are eligible for the fellowship. All right, so today we're talking about the National Science Foundation, that is NSF, Graduate Research Fellowship Program, which you will also see abbreviated the GRFP. And forgive me if sometimes I reverse the F and the R, my last name having Ford in it, I often will type them reverse. I am a professor in chemical and biological engineering here at UB. And I want to first give you a little bit of feel about my own GRFP experiences and why I am very passionate about this. So in 2004, I was an undergraduate senior and I applied and I was rejected, but I found that a really helpful experience to both put my ideas on paper as I was working on my graduate research statement to apply for grad school, and to have some information that was I got the feedback from that first time that I could reuse in my next submission. So as a senior, you can apply. You can also apply one time as a graduate student. And I applied in my first semester as a PhD student in 2005, and it was awarded, and very much due to having had that feedback from my first submission. In 2009, as a graduate student, I was a peer mentor to other University of Illinois graduate students interested in applying to the NSF GRFP, and I had I took a STEM class on STEM outreach. And so some classmates in that class had reached out for advice and were awarded. And so that was a class all about broader impacts, really. I have, as a faculty member, reviewed many NSF proposals and other competitive national graduate fellowships. And so if you have questions about, say, the Department of Energy Computational Science Fellowship, I can also answer questions about that. I got my first NSF proposal funded in 2019 after an initial round of rejection. I met Elizabeth in 2020, and she and this program were very helpful to one of my students to apply for the program. I moved to UB in 2021, and I became the first faculty fellow for this program. And last year, I helped several UB students, as well as 3 of my own former students, to apply for the GRFP, and several of these students actually received the fellowship or were honorable mention last year. And I also reviewed for this fellowship last year. So happy to be continuing to support this work. So now less about me and more about the program. What is it? How do you apply? How do you determine if you're eligible? Why would you want to apply? Those are the main questions to answer. So first, why would you want a fellowship from the National Science Foundation? All of the funding agencies have a specific mission, and they do provide opportunities that support their mission. So the National Science Foundation, United States National Science Foundation, has goals for discovery, learning, research infrastructure, and stewardship. And a big piece of this is this broadly inclusive science and engineering workforce and the scientific literacy of all citizens. Also working on the nation's research capability and supporting science and engineering research and education. So those are all really important things that influence what goes into the application process, and the fact that they provide this fellowship in the first place, because it supports workforce development, science and engineering research, and education. Now, it is also a United States tax dollar supported program, which means within their mission, they can be restrictive into who they say is eligible based on where the funding comes from. So I'll talk more about that later. So one can go to the National Science Foundation, and this statement is directly from the nsf.gov website. I do want to point to this page of theirs, put it on my screen here, and I'm going to show a brief video. Check the sound, okay. Just as a sanity check, can anyone hear the volume that displayed? H or
Yes.
Elizabeth? Yes, okay, thank you so much.
This is about discovery,
Pushing the edge of the known.
changing the way we live.
Did you ever use a CD, cell phone, barcode, that thing they call the internet?
Maybe a touchscreen, LED lights, a web browser, GPS.
Ever get an MRI, do a Google search, check a weather forecast?
Every one of those things was improved on or made possible by fundamental research supported by the National Science Foundation.
And there's also 3D printing, laser eye surgery, safe for cars.
New biomedical tools, improved disaster preparedness.
Even disease-resistant bees.
Today, NSF supports people and places to develop tomorrow's scientists and engineers.
And create new knowledge in fields from A to Z.
We're the only federal agency that supports fundamental research in all disciplines of science and engineering. And we fund and manage the United States Antarctic program.
Every year, we receive about 50,000 research proposals. Each is evaluated by a diverse mix of university faculty and others who help NSF assess the significance and quality of the proposed research.
NSF's rigorous merit review process is considered the gold standard the world over for evaluating proposals in a competitive environment.
We fund about 12,000 new awards annually.
And every year, 93% of the Foundation's budget goes back out to support more than 360,000 researchers, teachers, postdoctoral fellows, trainees, and students at 2,000 institutions.
Well over 200 NSF-supported scientists later received the Nobel Prize for their groundbreaking discoveries.
Since its inception in 1950, NSF investments have helped build the backbone of the U.S. scientific enterprise
And transform universities and colleges into centers of scientific innovation, creativity, and discovery.
The result? New knowledge, technologies, and products that continue to address societal challenges,
Fuel the economy and strengthen national security.
shape the U.S. as a world leader in science and technology,
And enhance the well-being of people across the U.S. and around the globe.
What really causes economic growth is it's always innovation. So how do we get more of it? We invest in basic research. That's as simple as that.
All right, so that was a trailer, if you will, from the National Science Foundation. So one more video. I think this one is really well done. It provides a great interactive overview before I dive into the nitty-gritty.
The National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship is one of the most prestigious fellowships in the country for students pursuing a research-based master's or PhD.
NSF took me from a second year's master's student with an idea of what I kind of wanted to do with my career to a national lab that was leading the world in what I was working on.
The fellowship provides students with a stipend of $34,000 and tuition for 3 years.
When you're granted the fellowship, there are no teaching responsibilities, and so that frees up a lot of your time to devote only to research.
The unique thing about NSF as a fellowship is it follows you wherever you go, so you're not necessarily attached to a graduate school or a graduate program.
Our office helps students both through our developmental programs and on an individual basis. Our new emphasis is really trying to work to make sure that graduate students are aware of this award and applying at the earliest opportunity.
Faculty should really encourage their students to apply for this type of external funding because it opens opportunities both for the students and then also for the faculty.
When you come to the field attached to NSF, there's something that it says about you that you can't say about yourself.
All right, so you may have recognized Elizabeth's voice on that. An exciting thing new this year is the stipend rate has gone up. It is now $37,000 per year for 3 years. You have a 5-year time period for that. So if you need to put it on hold for a couple of allowable reasons that they allow you to do so, it also pays $12,000 to your university. A important stipulation here is that while it's movable, you must study at a US-based institution. You also do not have any required service to the United States after you finish the fellowship. That's what it means about no service requirement. It is flexible and portable, where if you graduate from one institution, you can go to another school with it. There are various professional development programs that are unlocked for fellowship recipients when you can look through those on the NSF website. But this is one of those awards that people don't take off of their resume or their CV, right? So you might have gotten something as an undergraduate student that might stay on there for a little while, but after you transition to your full-time job, you may take it off. But this is one that people keep on there. It's that important or that recognizable and distinctive. So it's worth taking a shot at it. So there are 2 different websites for the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, and worth pointing those out. So the first is nsfgrfp.org. This is from a outside contractor. It has lots of tips. It has frequently asked questions. It has links. And so if we go to that web page, it looks very modern. It has information for applicants. That would be you as a student. It reminds you or clearly presents what the deadlines are. And note there are different deadlines depending on what type of field you are in. It has a different deadline for the reference letter and has some specific webinars that are available. So it has also information for your letter writers, for them to see some information and requirements, and kind of puts it in an easily digestible location. The National Science Foundation has its own website. This is nsf.org/GRFP. Now, this website is says beta form, right? So it's still evolving, but the key thing that's available here is the rules. Here it calls it guidelines. This is 22-614. This is a government document. They call it the solicitation. That is, what are the rules for this year? You can view it as a PDF, and I highly recommend that you download that PDF and save a copy on your computer and highlight important information. But I'm going to open it here as an HTML. So here's what it calls program solicitation. This is this year's rules. Everything regarding the rules is located in this one document. If you mess up on any of the rules, NSF will reject you completely. So it's important to pay attention to the rules. So while the contractor's website is very good, clear, the solicitation is our reference document that we will pay very careful attention to. And then when you need to actually submit the application or view the results, there's a website called research.gov/GRFP. And again, these slides are going to be available in the UB box, and so that you can access them there. So there's where one can register for an account as an applicant, sign in, submit your information, and see the list of who won it last year, what schools they were at, that kind of thing. So back to the presentation. So I will mostly refer to this solicitation, and this is this year's number, 2022 solicitation number 614. So how many do they give out? This is actually supposed to be the number 2750, not 27, let me go back, 2000. This is supposed to be 2750 to not overpromise by tenfold. So we expect them to award 2,750 fellows this year. They also have a number of honorable mentions. In 2020, there were 2,000 of those. So this number is increasing, showing increased investment into the future of science and engineering. And they represent many or most of the US states and territories. It's typically less than 20% success rate. But again, if you apply as an undergraduate and then apply again as a graduate student, you're improving your odds. They welcome people of all gender backgrounds or gender identities, from any and all racial and ethnic groups, persons with disabilities. You can see here 40% of the recipients in 2018 were undergraduates, so you're not at a disadvantage if you apply as a senior. And they, it's not just one or two baccalaureate institutions that receive the awards. Many universities are represented, and UB is very well represented among them. So some things to remember. Reading the latest solicitation, so I've pointed you to the 22 version. Sometimes the rules change slightly from year to year, so don't look at, or if you do look at a previous application by someone else, note that they might have changed things like page limits. Those don't change very frequently, but they might have changed those types of things, or the headings, or some other rules. So look at this year's solicitation. You, as the applicant, are responsible for having a complete application. They only review complete applications. So I showed you that it's due in October. You don't start it on October 15th, hoping to get it done by October 17th. That will not work. You need to start early. That's why being here today is great. I UB is fantastic in that we enable you to have your draft statements read by several people. I should have updated this to replace Elizabeth's name with H's name, so I apologize for that, but I'll do that when we conclude. So several of the people who are presenting the workshop this week, myself, will be very happy to review your draft statements, and I read them mostly from the scientific expertise as reading like as a reviewer might read them, so that you get a bit of what it might be like to get scored before you actually submit it. And then you have the time to revise before you have to formally submit it. I also highly encourage you to get feedback from your research mentors. It should be written by you, but certainly you want to have them read through it, provide any sort of scientific validation check, right? That you're speaking truthfully and clearly about the knowledgeably about the topic, I would rather say. And then you have to certify that you are eligible. And there's two main eligibility criteria. So first of these is the citizenship status and then the education level. And I'll go into both of these in the next few slides. So first of all, on the citizenship status, this is what I was mentioning at the beginning, that because it's a US funded program, they have then the prerogative to restrict eligibility in different ways. And the rules for the fellowship currently are that one must be a US citizen, national, or permanent resident to be eligible. All others are not eligible for the fellowship. So that is the first rule of this fellowship. We would love for it to be open to more. There are some other opportunities that are open to students who don't fall into these categories, but this fellowship is only for these three categories. Regarding the education level, if you are an undergraduate senior or a bachelor's degree holder with no graduate study yet, you are eligible to apply. And you are eligible to apply as many times as that is true. If you were out of school, but most people don't apply multiple times in that category, but they are eligible. The second grouping is current graduate students. So first year graduate student or second year graduate student. These are both agnostic to whether you are a master's or PhD student. They're just in graduate school, and first year means that you could be in the very first semester, or you might have started in the spring term or a summer term, but you were still in the first year. Second year graduate students are eligible if you did not complete more than 12 months by the start of August 1st. So you're applying in October. At that point, you've probably been in your graduate program about 13 months, 14, 15 months. We group these two together, the first and second year graduate students, because current graduate students are only eligible to apply one time in their first or second year, but not both. This was a major change about a decade ago to the fellowship rules. There may be some reasons to wait to the second year, but it is highly advisable in many cases for first year graduate students to apply. So we can talk to you about specific cases later, but note that you're only allowed one time as a graduate student. The fourth category is someone who did do some graduate study, has not completed a PhD. This would generally be someone who earned a master's degree, and then has had an interruption of graduate study of at least 2 years and not currently enrolled in graduate school. So let's say you finish a master's, you go work in industry or some other field for a while, and then you are interested in pursuing a graduate degree. So that is another category in which people are eligible to apply. All of the eligibility information is carefully detailed in a way that is clearer, much clearer articulated than what I have here in that solicitation. And so in the solicitation, you can search for eligibility, and they have lots of information about it, but eligibility information, and it goes through all of these bullet points that specifically talks about all of the cases and then how many times you can apply. So pay careful attention to those, but I think I have nicely summarized that. So NSF says that specifically in the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, this is not true of most of their other grant projects, but in the fellowship program, they're funding people, not specific projects. So they do care that you have some ideas of what you want to pursue and that you're pursuing certain STEM fields. However, they want to be developing the future of scientific leaders. And so you, in your application, get to showcase yourself, both what you have already accomplished, what your current interests are, and providing evidence that demonstrates that you have a trajectory that sets you up to be a leader in the future in science and engineering. And so that's the kind of the funding the people part. So to support that, you have an application. Again, it's supported through the research.gov website. You'll have some general information of your name and what university you're studying at, and some forms to fill out. You have what is called the Personal Relevant Background and Future Goals Statement. This is a 3-page document that you will hear a lot more about in this workshop. But again, it has this very specific name. It's wordy, but that's what it's called. And so that's really about you. The second one is called the Graduate Research Plan Statement, which is a 2-page document. This is a proposed idea of what you might pursue on your research as a graduate student. If you receive the fellowship, NSF does not check that you actually executed that research plan. So if you do end up switching topic areas or things deviate from that plan, you won't lose the fellowship. But it's showing that you can plan out a research study, that you can think deeply about research, and you can articulate your understanding of the topic and can propose something that is logically reasoned. So you'll hear more about that research plan statement also throughout this workshop. You are required to submit electronic versions of your transcripts. So there may be more than one of those if you have attended multiple institutions. And then reference letters. Now, there are a few nuances on this references letter part. These are 2 pages maximum. So, and they have certain formatting requirements. So you should share the solicitation rules with your letter writers. The website for the contractor also has information for the letter writers that is consistent with the solicitation. So you shouldn't just say, hey, write me a recommendation letter. They should know what the rules are so that they don't disqualify you by not following the rules. The other thing is that you are required to provide at least 3 names of people who can write letters for you. These need to not be relatives. Generally, at least one of them has been a supervisor in a research capacity. Often they are faculty, but you might have had an experience at some sort of research institute or other type of facility. They might be professors you had as instructors for courses. They could have been student club faculty advisors, something like that. They may be university staff who've seen you demonstrate leadership in some capacity. Maybe not your supervisor at a part-time job that doesn't have a connection to science and engineering, but if you can make a case for them having witnessed some sort of leadership capacity, then perhaps, but they typically are faculty members. So you need to submit at least 3 names. If you have at least 2 letters, your application will be complete. You may submit up to 5 names. Well, what happens if all 5 people upload their letters? only 3 of them are actually read by the reviewers. You, when you submit your application, put in the rank order you would like those 5 names to be read if they're all provided. Now, why did they have you do this? Sometimes faculty, very well-meaning, forget and miss the deadline. They do not want you to be disqualified by one of these 5 people forgetting, because you can't apply for another year, or if you're a current graduate student, you may not be able to apply again at all. So if you put in 5 names, you rank the priority of how you want them to be read. The actual letter writer does not know that rank ordering and does not know if their letter is actually read or not. So if you have a research mentor, you probably want them to be the top choice, that if their letter is submitted, it will be read. But maybe there's something else more compelling and you might want to rank them, but you are allowed to choose that ranking. So you're able to submit between 3 and 5 names, and 2 have to be submitted or your application is not reviewed. So it's trying to enhance the chances that you'll get at least 3 letters, or at least 2, but a maximum of 3 that are actually read as part of the application process. Okay, the 2 statements. The solicitation has very specific details about what your font, spacing, page margins, etc. So refer to that. I don't type them in here because I don't want to get them wrong, and I want you to refer to the solicitation. There are specific page limits. So if you go over by 1 word, they will reject it. So don't risk that. Also, if it says 3 pages and you submit 1 full page, you put yourself at a serious disadvantage because all of the other applicants will have submitted 3 pages. So while you might be able to be concise, you want to be both concise and thorough. So tell a story about this statement and use the 3 pages wisely. So it doesn't mean that you have to be exactly at the bottom of the 3rd page, but that if space allows, you might have a little bit more white space here and there, but not big blocks of text or big chunks of white space, because otherwise the reviewers will say, well, I didn't get a very good explanation about this part. Maybe she didn't explain her future goals. And you see a big white space, and so maybe they didn't have time and they didn't finish it, right? So, so don't put yourself at a disadvantage by not taking full advantage of the space, but also don't go above any page maximums. The page limits do include any references, the citations to those, any figures, or other types of information you might need to put into that. And so you are allowed to cite the literature, but you probably don't want a full page of literature citations, because then you have, taken up space that could be otherwise about yourself or your future research plans. I'll also point out that a common thing that happens with applicants is that some will list every specific time they've given a presentation and a poster, things like that. And actually you should, somewhere in your application, have listed all of those publications, oral presentations, and poster presentations. I encourage you to talk to your research mentor about the ways to distinguish those and reference those in your field. So different fields may have different norms for how you list a poster presentation or a peer-reviewed conference proceedings paper or peer-reviewed journal article. So make sure you do list those if you have them, including any poster experiences, any oral presentation experiences, but get some feedback on those. Also, students will tend to, or applicants will tend to do things like mention, I presented at the FOSB meeting or the UB acronym, and they don't know what that means. And so assume that if you have an acronym, you're going to need to spell that out so that your audience will be able to appreciate if you say the certain Schomburg Fellowship. No one outside of UB knows what the Schomburg Fellowship is. So explain when 10 words or less, what that fellowship is or what that presentation venue is. And so that we as the staff with this program can help give you some feedback on those. But those were, as a reviewer, the common things that we noted that were confusing in applications. So again, ask your mentors and ask us for some help with that if you have questions. All right, here are two terminology things that NSF uses: intellectual merit and broader impacts. Those are NSF jargon. So intellectual merit and broader impacts, you must have sections named those two things in both of your statements. Used to be the idea that maybe the research plan was all intellectual merit and maybe the personal background was all broader impacts. That is not true. You have both of those in both statements. So every proposal for any kind of funding that's reviewed at the National Science Foundation is evaluated under these two criteria. What is the intellectual merit? What is the broader impacts? And I'll detail those a bit more. So you must have both in both statements. And you do need to certify that the statements are your own work. So you can't take a proposal from a previous student in your lab or some other friend. It must be your work. You can get feedback from mentors, from us, but you do need to write the application and it needs to be your ideas. Okay, so here are the definitions for what the National Science Board has deemed the review criteria of intellectual merit and broader impacts. Intellectual merit encompasses the potential to advance knowledge. So we said in the NSF mission, it's all about basic science and creating new knowledge. So what is the potential to advance knowledge? That could be through the research or through you as an individual. How is investing in you advancing knowledge? Broader impacts encompasses the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. So the research could benefit society. You doing other kinds of activities outside of the research could contribute to societal benefit, or the nation investing in you as a scientist could benefit society. So there's kind of all three of those components in there. So under intellectual merit, these are the types of things in your application that demonstrate intellectual merit. So in the box, I've just reiterated the aspects of intellectual ability and other abilities for performing research to advance knowledge. So your academic achievement, that could be through GPA, but if you have a GPA that is not perfect, you can explain growth in your academic achievement, specific awards and honors that you received, things where you thrived in your major and maybe you grew as a student and you achieved as a more senior undergraduate student, or you really thrived in the first year of your graduate program. So it's not all about the undergraduate GPA. The reference letters are a key place to demonstrate intellectual ability. It says here choice of graduate school, but as a reviewer, I didn't see people's choice of graduate school. I did see what their current institution was, but if they were an undergraduate, I didn't know what their choice of graduate school was unless they decided to put that into their essay. So I would say that's a small piece. You also, through your research plan, you get to demonstrate your creativity, your logic in conducting this plan, your actual research experience and what things you've accomplished through research are ways you are demonstrating intellectual merit. If you have both research and coursework or extracurriculars that show that you have worked independently and as a team member, those could demonstrate intellectual merit. Ways that you interpret and communicate your research, both in the statements themselves, but through public venues you've been able to share your work through publications or presentations or course projects, might be ways. There might be other experiences like study abroad or leadership things, typically students must have done some research to be competitive applicants, and typically need to do something outside of just doing research. So if you get great grades, do some research, and you don't do anything outside of the classroom, it's hard to be demonstrating the leadership and that, like, that you're growing and advancing kind of piece. Broader impacts, again, those extracurriculars are often woven into the broader impacts. So ways that you benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. So in the very first part, when I said, what is NSF? One of the NSF missions is to broader participation of underrepresented groups, and this is within science and engineering. These are groups that have been traditionally excluded from science and engineering workforce. So women, they don't specifically list non-binary genders, but that would be included here now more holistically. They say minorities, but in the NSF, this would include those that have been underrepresented in science and engineering fields. So people with marginalized identities holistically are in this broadening participation group. Students with disabilities and veterans. Anything that you do that broadens the participation of people who've been marginalized within science and engineering, including yourself, if you're a member of one of these groups, that is towards the desired societal outcomes, is improving the number and representation. Now, doing things where maybe you don't have an underrepresented identity, doing things that give back to the community or that help in the recruitment or the support of these groups is also well regarded amongst the reviewers. The other things related are things that promote teaching, training, learning, and things that are societal benefits. So in that little promo video we saw about the NSF, and they talked about some of the big projects like Google searches and GPS, right? You know that those have had major impacts on our society. Maybe your graduate research will be that revolutionary, and maybe it won't, but hopefully there are clear benefits to society for the type of research that you aim to do. And so those can be clearly articulated as a way to demonstrate broader impacts. And then also leadership potential. So if you just say, I'm going to be a teaching assistant, that comes across as a bit shallow or a bit incomplete, perhaps, about broader impacts, because in most programs, there's some expectation to be involved in teaching or mentoring other students in the lab. But if there are things like participating in specific programs that mentor new undergraduate students in the lab, or that mentor high school students, or that specifically serve underrepresented groups, those would be positively received. But these broader impacts do not have to be explicit to science and engineering, but other ways that you're giving back to the community or that you've been involved on campus can be ways to communicate your broader impacts. So there's not just one thing to do for broader impacts, and you can't do all of them. These are ideas, but you need to have something, right? So in both your research plan and in your background statement, you have to articulate your broader impacts. So these could be in ways that improve STEM education with schools or teachers, scientific literacy, public engagement, clubs, museums, lots and lots of ways. Some people really like science communication and do things with TikTok and other media. Some people describe their own personal experiences, such as being the first member of their family to attend college, or to themselves have studied to served in the military and be a veteran, returning to study in engineering, for example. So the NSF document has examples of broader impacts, and so we encourage you to read that. But there may be things here that we have not listed. you are not expected in this essay to provide examples of traumatic personal experiences or things that are very private in nature. You're welcome to share as much as you want to, but you're really trying to just demonstrate broader impacts rather than it's not a hardship kind of competition or something like that, and don't feel like you need to be very personally revealing about something like that, because as reviewers, we're thinking about leadership and engagement and ways that your science impacts society and things like that. So we do care about you as a person, and we want to support you as a person, but this doesn't need to be psychologically difficult experience to put this together. It should be a thoughtful reflection on your personal experiences. But if you have questions, you can ask us about that too. So you are in this personal, relevant background, future goals. You want to think about making sure you cover the background, but also future goals. What do you want to do with this degree? Why do you want to study this? So what is personal, professional, or educational experiences that have prepared you and set you up to pursue a STEM graduate study? What are some unique things about yourself? You do not have to go simply chronological and say, the first time I ever thought about science was as a 5-year-old, and go strictly chronologically. Some of the other workshop leaders will discuss some strategies for telling a nice, compelling story with this and weaving in that narrative through this personal goals statement. You do want to talk about your previous research experiences, because if it's clear or not clear from your statements that you have actually done any research, it will be hard for you to be a competitive applicant. So what are those research activities? What did you learn from the experience? What are the outcomes? Was this a manuscript that has been submitted? Was this a research finding that's being further tested in a lab that you have now left? Were you able to gain certain skill set that's going to serve you in your future? What was the purpose, methodology, techniques, findings, conclusion? And then leadership. What kind of demonstrating your own personal leadership potential through demonstrated experiences. And for us, for the reviewers and for yourself, to be thinking about your career goals. So how would the fellowship contribute to achieving the career goals? It's not common to, it's not very compelling if you say the fellowship will give me money and that will help my career goals. But what are your career goals, and how would being able to pursue this research plan be a positive thing for you? And so it can be more about, career aspirations in general. All right, the research plan is 2 pages. Now this one is where we get a little bit nuanced with the fields. I'll show you a list of the fields in a moment, but NSF's mission is basic science, new knowledge, fundamental understanding. NSF's mission is not cure disease. It is not solve problems related to the energy crisis, right? So the U.S. Department of Energy, the U.S. National Institutes of Health, these and other funding agencies have different missions, and one might have research that could fall under multiple agencies, that your advisor might have funding or projects that lie within the realm of any of these agencies. But one has to have a research topic that can be described as fitting within the NSF mission. So even energy applications and environmental applications and human health applications can be described as ways that provide fundamental new knowledge, but that are not curing diseases or providing energy infrastructure for the world or et cetera. So you need a plan that demonstrates that you understand research design. You have some background setting up what is the problem statement, what's the hypothesis or the objective, right? If you are not doing hypothesis-driven research, but you're doing more of a, there is a need to do this work for building this device or building this mathematical model or this tool that will help us understand fundamental knowledge, then that could be an alternative to a hypothesis. You don't have to be overly specific because your audience is going to be generally faculty, but not always just faculty, but generally PhD level scientists in your disciplinary area. So I am a chemical engineering professor. I do computational biomedical research. I reviewed any applicant who was in chemical engineering. They could be doing fuel cells, they could be doing bio, they could be doing computational, they could be doing catalysis, all kinds of things. There were multiple chemical engineering panels, reviewers reviewing chemical engineering applicants, but the research topics were all mixed around. So I might not know really much about catalysis beyond an undergraduate level, but I should be able to understand the research proposals. And if you want to make any connections to previous research, right, this is, in my undergraduate research, I've learned about this, and here's the next steps, and here's what I'm going to do. If this sounds like you're just writing a research plan of what you've already done, that will not be that convincing. And you do have to have the intellectual merit and the broader impacts components. So for the writing well, do attend the trainings, read the instructions, have plenty of time, read some examples and get feedback. We, on our UB page, I'll point you to this in a moment, but we have examples that do exist. I always find it helpful to read other people's examples. So I mentioned briefly eligible fields of study. So these are the fields. So it's basically life sciences, physical sciences, social sciences, STEM educational sciences, and engineering. You can see within here a number of sub areas. There are subfields that are itemized in the appendix in the solicitation. So briefly, just point this out. The very end of this document, the solicitation, there are subcategories listed. So life sciences could include biochemistry, bioinformatics, ecology, etc. And so when you submit, you're going to be asked what your category and your subcategory is. Additionally, your deadlines depend on which area you're in. So if you're in life sciences, you need to know if ecology is in life sciences or in for example, social sciences, or if you're going to do, or ecology is a life science, not a geoscience, for example. If something is kind of borderline, look at those subcategories. So there are different deadlines based on the disciplinary area. Note that computer and information science and engineering is not the same date as the rest of engineering. So pay attention very carefully to where your subcategory would fall. Math ed is in a different category than math sciences. So be mindful, right? So if you have questions or you want to discuss very specific nuances of your research project, we can help you evaluate or how to phrase, how to put it into the NSF mission if you have questions about that. Ineligible fields of study. You cannot be in a professional degree program to be eligible for the NSF. So this would be MBA, medical doctorate, Juris Doctorate, veterinary medicine, dental, PharmD programs. These are considered professional degree programs. Also, the joint science professional degree programs like the MD, PhD are not eligible. Things like Masters of Public Health, Masters of Social Work, general humanities, general education are not eligible, with the exceptions of STEM, education, learning sciences, and history of science. So if you are in one of those categories, look very specifically at the subcategories allowed in those areas. So we have a lot of information through UB. So this is a longer URL, but this is the top Google result for UB NSF GRFP. So here we have a link to the NSF website. We have some details about summarizing the eligibility, pointing you to the application portal. We list the winners and recipients and honorable mentions from all of the years that we have records for. It goes back quite a ways, and quite a legacy of students who have received the fellowship. We also have, we organize this workshop and we'll archive the materials. There's also a page here called Alex Lang's website. This was a person who received the fellowship a number of years ago. So it was a successful applicant in 2010. Note that this website is not the rules. This is one person who created this on a volunteer basis, updating it in 2021. We already see that this is outdated. So don't read the rules from Alex Lang's webpage, but there's some good things here. So there's some general advice. There is some details and tips documents. There are some questions that this person encourages you to think about for yourself. Here's what the prompts were for the statements in previous years, and so has some tips, has also like a recommended structure. You do not have to follow this structure, but you do need to have a section labeled intellectual merit and a section labeled broader impacts. Those are required. It has a number of different essays that other people have submitted as examples. And note that the rules may have changed between when these were submitted and now. So if you look at the ones from many years ago, they may be very different than the current requirements. So take those with caution. The ones from 2021 are more likely to be more relevant. They are organized by application area, what level the person was at, and whether they received the fellowship or were honorable mention. And this would be the research plan and then the personal statement, background, and research experience statement. So they also have whether they've included their scoring and where are they at? So any other additional advice. So people get to submit these. And so it's a great database, but they're not prescriptive. They are examples for you to view and maybe learn from. So don't feel like you have to read all of them. Another thing that is not reflected in my notes is when we think about senior undergrad, first year grad, second year grad. When the review process happens, reviewers are instructed or told what is your level, whether you were in the senior or you have a bachelor's degree and you're not currently in grad school, whether you're a first year grad student or your second year grad student. If they encourage or they tell us, instruct us as reviewers to read the seniors first and score them, then to read the first years and score them, then to read all the second years and score them. So a second year grad student is not being compared to a first year or a senior undergrad. When we do the actual review panel, not every application is discussed, but those that are kind of borderline for maybe making it, maybe being honorable mention, or maybe borderline honorable mention are discussed. They get scores from the reviewers, and the really highly ranked ones are not discussed because they're probably going to get it already. And the really poorly ones are not going to get it, but the ones that are confusing are discussed. But they have us discuss them in the order of senior undergrad, first year grad, second year grad. So as a senior, if you have any publications, that's amazing. It's not considered a requirement. It's not officially a requirement at every level, but honestly, as the second year grad students, if there's not something that's leading toward a publication, there are comments about that are often left by reviewers. So if you have done undergrad research, and maybe you did multiple undergrad research experiences, and so those don't, because you did multiple of them, and you weren't with any of them for multiple years, maybe that didn't lead to publications. Then it might be very compelling as a first year grad student to apply and to be able to leverage all those experiences and any kind of achievements you had from undergrad, but you don't have to make new achievements as a first-year grad student and try to get a publication out to be competitive as a second-year grad student. Like if you apply as a first year, you really can leverage your senior year. If you apply as a second-year grad student, they're going to expect a slightly higher bar than the first year grads and the senior undergraduates. So if you are first year and you're like, I know for a fact that I've written a manuscript, it's under review, I think that's going to be more compelling it should be coming out by the time I'm a second year grad student, then maybe wait until you're a second year grad student to apply if there's been something major that's happened. Or maybe you're somehow first year project's really gonna click. I mean, I started my first year project like the week before I applied for the fellowship. So there was no way I was going to have a lot of results by the time my second year came around. So that's up to everyone individually about whether you apply when, but notice that there's quite a mixture here in these winners. There's a lot of undergrads here. So a mixture. So they also has here, like, there's some differences between some old formats and stuff. So anyway, I just wanted to point this to you as a resource. It could be good, but to note that you're not directly compared to the other years, but there is a escalating bar for the standard that second year graduate students would be held to that would be different than what senior undergraduates' expectations would be. Okay, that's a lot of me talking. That is the end of what I have pre-prepared. We're happy to open up for questions. And just one other piece that I'll share is that generally, H is going to be your first point of contact for the fellowship and can help with sort of those administrative questions about eligibility and the fellowship and your program and that kind of thing, and can also be a great resource for the first round of sketching out your essay, your 2 statements. I come in once you've written your first draft of your essay, and I'm happy to read either or both of your statements, but really is that mock peer review. What is it like to have the faculty score the fellowship applications and to be able to give you that feedback? Do I understand it? Was this logically organized from a scientific standpoint before you submit it? So after you've met with H, then I like it. I'm not very good at reading your essay while you're sitting in the room with me. I need the time to like look at it, make some comments, give you some feedback, send it back to you by email, or to then arrange to have a Zoom meeting or in-person meeting to discuss the feedback after you've had time to look at it. So I need, like, that's how my brain works, is I can't review it in real time while you're sitting there. Others that may be, the Writing Center, I think, has appointments like that. You can also leverage our Center for Excellence in Writing. And I believe one of the other workshop presenters is from there. I might be wrong on that. But anyway, we have this great Center for Excellence in Writing. So I'll be quiet, but that's where I may come in later, that you can reach back out to me in the process. So questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat or turn on your microphone with or without video. So I do see some questions now in the chat. And also note that H had information about how to make an appointment with them. So Mackenzie asked, my main thing is my research falls in between psych and neuroscience. How do you pick which one to submit to? And so often you're thinking about what's going to be the name of your degree program. You might be applying to multiple degree programs, and so then there may be a debate, but if you know you're really looking for programs that offer a PhD that emphasizes neuroscience, whether they might be hosted in a psychology department or in a more interdisciplinary cognitive science program or in a medical school or something, you would want to kind of make some of those personal decisions. But if you know that you really want to emphasize the psychology aspects, then you would be probably taking more psychology related classes, but then having a research emphasis in neuroscience, right? That might help influence your decision. So deeply personal when you have interdisciplinary or research interests that can fall between multiple programs, but and then also if your topic, like, I mentioned that I was chemical engineering, so there's an assumption about the knowledge base of the reviewers. And so if you're going to be writing a research plan that's heavily about the brain, and, and most people in psychology know a lot about the brain too, but thinking about the expertise of the reviewers who have neuroscience versus psychology as the label. There is a question about a 4+1 program, a master's in 1 year, that is explicitly discussed in the solicitation. And I will point you to where this is because it affects some people. So let's see, there's a 5-year. So in the eligibility, so it says a master's of any kind, including a bachelor's master's program. So if you had a prior graduate enrollment that you did do a bachelor's master's degree program, you cannot be enrolled in a graduate program at the application deadline, and you cannot have, and it has to have been 2 or more consecutive years past the graduate degree enrollment at the time of the application deadline. So it means, and so this also says like joint master's, bachelor's degree are defined as currently pursued and awarded. So if you're applying while enrolled, you are considered graduate students. You have to have, so like there's various things, you're only allowed to apply 1 time as a graduate student. Even if you, like, so if you apply as a joint MS/BS student, you're not allowed to apply again as a doctoral student. Unless, yeah, so with these, like, then you have, you're just not allowed. Like it just says you're limited to 1 application. So those are, so like, here's some more stuff about the joint master's BS. So like, pay attention very carefully to that about what is your actual status, and then look from there and ask us questions if you have need assistance in interpreting these, but they've tried to be more clear and specific about the BS/MS joint programs. Your advisor does not need to have any funded project of any kind. And the idea of the NSF GRFP is that you have the funding so that you can pursue the topic of your choice, potentially, in a lab that can host you. Now, if you pursue, oh, I don't know, like nuclear engineering, that might be challenging at UB if we don't have anyone who's doing nuclear engineering, for example, or petroleum engineering or something like that. So there does need to be some knowledge of what's actually happening at the universities or the labs that you want to apply to. And they may, but you're coming in with 3 years of funded support. And so you're able to do things different than what your advisor got funded, because you have 3 years that are covering your full stipend, and that they don't have to then use their grants for you to achieve the deliverables of those grants. So you might have had ideas of research projects that come from your current mentors that might be as a graduate student or as an undergraduate student. Certainly your own research experiences shape a lot about your background knowledge and interests and skill sets. And so if you have already begun graduate research that might be related to a topic your advisor has helped you determine or has pointed you towards as a new student, or maybe you've already done, you're in your 2nd year and you've really been writing that prospectus and already been thinking about or writing a full proposal, but you define the research objectives for your research plan. So it can't be simply that you take a funded research project and fit it into the 2 pages. It has to be your ideas of directions you would go with this, but the overall topic area may be highly influenced by the research topics that you have identified through consultation with a research advisor. These are great questions. And also H or Elizabeth, if you have other things that are complementary or different than what I've said, please chime in.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I recall you mentioning that the research or the interest that we have that we write about for the application doesn't necessarily need to be followed to a T, or like if we decide somewhere down the line we can like change it or shift it. Would it be, is there some sort of like would there be someone that we can like discuss this with or discuss the changes with, or are there guidelines for that, or is it sort of like just depending on where our research goes?
So some fellowships do require that you carefully follow a project plan. So some of the NIH fellowship requirements are that you specify a certain project, and that's the project that they're funding. There is a bit of that with the Department of Energy fellowships as well, that you have to have a specific project that you will pursue, and you have, if you need to change that, you need to get their committee to approve those changes. But with NSF, once you have that, the funding, they're funding you and your future. You can choose to do a different eligible STEM field. You could choose to go to a different university than what you originally thought. You can choose to switch very drastically within a research area, but as long as it's still a STEM eligible field at a US institution, no one gives you oversight on that. You have the ability to make those decisions yourself. Certainly, your degree program that you're in would give you, dissertation committee and those kind of people with oversight on those things, but that they don't report back to NSF. There's not a annual report about how your research plan has evolved or anything like that. It's very much about you as the scholar, not about the project.
But it should be a complete narrative. So what you say you've done and what you say you want to do should be connected. You should say, I've done these things. I want to go to grad school and do these things, so that your story makes sense to the reviewer.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the most important thing. Not the details of the research, but in graduate school, I would like to do this work. I haven't been able to do it. I'm going to do a PhD in this place with this kind of a department, and this is what I'm thinking. And they're looking at your intellectual thought process, your research thought process. So they're looking at you as a holistically reviewed person, not as this is the review, not like this is the research I'm going to do, step 1, step 2, step 3. So remember, the story has to make sense. Your whole narrative has to make sense about what you've done and where you want to go.
There's another question about, do you have to have an advisor? There's a couple of questions in here, but one, you are required to mention programs you might apply to, but if you don't have a yet advisor at that program, usually you list like the department chair of a chair of graduate studies, like there's a person there listed, but if you have a current research advisor, right, you would list that person and probably have a letter from that person. There's no, if I'm a faculty member and I have a research project that's funded by the National Science Foundation, I have specific deliverables and I have a yearly project report to submit. But I do not, this does not have that. So you can work in generally if you join someone's lab, they probably have a research emphasis, and you probably are working within the equipment that they have, the infrastructure of that lab, and that department and that facility. And so, if you're going to join my team, you're not going to be able to do experiments. You're going to have to use computational tools, right? So, so certainly my students would, even if they're funded by this fellowship, would be doing something within the scope of my expertise where I can mentor them. So there's that kind of thing, but it may be complementary to or distinct from the aims of any specific project that I have.
And how the funds get delivered are different than a faculty NSF grant. So the funds for the NSF GRFP goes to, in the case of UB, to the graduate school and it's managed by Megan Stewart, and the PI is Dr. Sandy Flash. So the money doesn't go to your PI, it goes to the university and it's applied to your account and you're paid that way. So there's no conflict of interest in terms of money to your faculty member and money to you.
Mm-hmm. Elizabeth, do you want to, or can you comment about the Suny kind of initiative, or is that
Sure
not approved this year?
Yeah, it has been. So the Suny system has this wonderful award called the Suny Great Award. And what it's trying to do is to recognize and reward students who are completing their graduate studies at a Suny school with a $5,000 Suny Great Award. So if you are a graduate student at a Suny school and you win, you receive the NSF GRFP, or even if you get honorable mention, you would get $5,000. And that Suny Great also applies to other externally competitive federally funded awards as well. So Suny Great is something you would get upon basically completing your first year of graduate school, or I think once you've committed to a graduate school and you're there, but it has to be a Suny school.
Yeah. And this would be eligible if you're an undergraduate at UB and choose to go to a Suny school, or if you are a current graduate student at UB or other Suny schools.
Correct.
Because we love you, we want to keep you, but if you go somewhere else, that's great too. You just don't get our $5,000 bonus. You don't see any new questions in the chat. Are there others? I'll give you the challenge of the homework before the next session. I encourage you to look through Alex Lang's website and see if you can find any examples from your area, or at least close to your area, and see if you just look through those personal statements or those research statements and get an idea for what those look like in your area before the next session. That way, it's not just the rules and requirements, but you really have like, oh, okay, here's what one looks like from a student who was in my situation 1 or 2 or 3 years ago, rather than just seeing the rules and it being pretty overwhelming, but to get some concrete examples.
H, do you want to talk about the UB box and the past funded examples in that box as well?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so I put my email into the chat, but I'll put it in there again since it's kind of a little bit of a ways up at this point. If you email me, I can add you to the UB box that we have currently. All of the workshop materials from last year in there, which I'll switch out with these ones once we're through. The solicitation is in there. And then we also have a folder with past applications. So all of the winning applications that people were willing to share from last year, for example, are in there. And I've labeled them all just according to the disciplines that the applicants were in. And then we also have some in there from previous years as well, but definitely a lot of materials in there to take a look at. So just shoot me an email if you want to have access to that.
One last comment, if you have your friends, lab mates that should also be applying to the NSF GRFP and they have not registered, please encourage them to contact H, and H can add them. It's really important that we have all undergraduate students and graduate students who are considering graduate school get access to this really important resource of the workshops, the recordings, and the box. So, you know, if your lab mates, friends, colleagues are also in a position to apply, please point them in H's way so that they can share this important resource with them.
Yeah, this is incredible that UB puts this together, and that, you know, we have a team of people that's really trying to support you all, and that if your friends, peers, colleagues don't take advantage of these things, they're putting themselves at a disadvantage compared to you and, you know, people at other universities who may have similar types of programs. So, or even entire courses that are related to making fellowship applications and things like that. So, I also, just having gone through the process myself, I think it was just really helpful to put my ideas on paper, and especially as a senior undergrad, to have written these 5 pages that then I could recycle into my applications for graduate study. They always ask you for a statement of purpose, and if I've had then a peer review, or, you know, from my advisor and from the staff here reviewed essays, then I'm really ready to go for graduate applications, which are typically due in November, December, or very early spring. So, so working on this through the fall means that maybe that Thanksgiving break is not so overwhelming with grad preparation if you're not already in graduate school. And if you're in graduate school, that research plan can be a really important part of your proposal, or can leverage from your research proposal as well. So,
we'll see you all tomorrow, same time, same Zoom, and we will be hearing from Dr. Rhonda Reed from the Center of Excellence in Writing about the personal statement writing, which is really probably the hardest part of writing about who you are and your intellectual development. The research stuff, you guys have been practicing that through your own research and work, but that personal statement piece is really challenging. So please join us tomorrow for part 2 of the NSF GRFP workshop. Thank you, Dr. Ford Versypt.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.